What could possibly drive a 14-year-old girl to go under the knife? Why did a procedure, sold as a harmless fix to her appearance, end in death? These questions surfaced in Mexican news feeds in early September 2024 when officials in Durango announced the passing of Paloma Nicole Arellano Escobedo. Initial assumptions of an accident or medical error quickly gave way to more disturbing findings. Shortly before her death, the girl had undergone plastic surgery in a private clinic that lacked authorization to perform such procedures on minors. Discrepancies in testimonies about which parent had given consent for the procedure only deepened suspicions of its illegality. Local journalists launched an inquiry, and the prosecutor's office demanded the clinic's records. As more data emerged, public attention intensified. People began discussing not the teenager's motives, but the actions of the adults whose decisions led to her death. Thus, a private tragedy turned into the start of a high-profile investigation, one that so far offers no answers but carries an escalating sense of unspoken guilt and accountability. Paloma Nicole Arellano Escobedo was born in the state of Durango, Mexico in 2009. She was the only child in the family. From early years, she was known for her calm nature, good grades, and love of music and animals. Teachers described her as shy, diligent, and well-mannered. Friends noted that she avoided conflict and rarely voiced dissatisfaction. Paloma's parents separated while she was still a child. Her father, Jose Arellano, lived separately, but maintained regular contact with his daughter. He covered part of the expenses, visited her on weekends, and took her to school events. Their relationship stayed warm, even though the family lived between two homes. Primary caretaking fell to her mother, Maria Escobedo, who worked in the private sector. According to acquaintances, she was exacting, monitored her daughter's appearance, and strove to have the girl present herself neatly and confidently. After the divorce, Maria began a new life with a partner, Victor N., who gradually assumed a role in Paloma's everyday life. He helped around the house, assisted the mother, and accompanied the girl to school. However, the family's close circle noted tension between Victor and the girl's father. Their interactions were formally polite, but trust between the men never took root. Jose remained wary of an outsider's involvement in his daughter's upbringing, believing that decisions concerning her should be made only by her biological parents. By 2024, Paloma was living with her mother and stepfather. She saw her father less frequently, but their connection didn't cease. They corresponded, called each other, and discussed her studies and future plans. Both sides of the family saw the girl differently. Her mother worked to build her confidence, seeing her as a teenager in need of support, while her father, on the other hand, sought to protect her from what he deemed excessive pressure. These disagreements, which had existed previously, showed themselves in day-to-day matters, from choice of her clothes to oversight of her social media activity. Neighbors described Paloma as quiet and polite. She rarely left the house without her mom and almost never took part in public events. Family acquaintances said she went out of her way not to upset the adults around her. She gave in easily, avoided arguments. What many saw as obedience later became a focal point for investigators trying to figure out just how much of her decision-making was really her own. At school, Paloma kept a low profile but maintained steady grades. Her classmates mentioned she was into the internet, especially social media, where discussions about looks, fashion, and how appearance affects teen confidence were common. Teachers recalled that she often shied away from attention and was uncomfortable talking about how she looked. At home, though, those topics came up often, something that, according to close friends of the family, created tension between her and her father. By mid-2024, Paloma was caught between two very different approaches from her parents. Her father urged caution and a focus on education, while her mother encouraged her interest in self-expression and her appearance. Her stepfather supported her mother's views, which only deepened the conflict. By that time, Paloma had begun to rely more on her mother and Victor's opinion, since she lived with them full-time. Those family dynamics would later become central to the investigation because they framed the decisions adults made the day everything went wrong. For now, Paloma was living the typical life of a teenager, going to school, spending most of her time at home, unaware her future was about to become part of a criminal case. On a morning in late August 2024, Paloma Nicole Arellano Escobedo arrived with her mother at a small private medical center in Durango. The clinic was located on the ground floor of a commercial building, a space rented out for medical use. Inside, it was clean, though the setup was modest: a small waiting area, an exam room, and a separate space serving as an operating room. There was no signage, but a man who introduced himself as a cosmetic procedure specialist was present. Paloma came prepared. Her mom had explained the day before that the procedure would take a few hours and was meant to adjust a few small things about her appearance. The girl seemed calm, holding her phone and occasionally glancing at the screen, avoiding unnecessary conversation. The doctor did a basic checkup, asked a few questions, took her blood pressure, and filled out a paper form. Everything was done manually. Her mother signed off as her legal guardian. Before the operation started, the doctor explained the steps they'd take. His assistant prepped the tools and sterile supplies. Paloma was changed into disposable medical clothing and laid on a metal table. Only the doctor and his assistant were in the room. Her mother waited just outside in the reception area, behind the door that led to the operating suite. The operation began around noon. According to the doctor, it was a cosmetic procedure focused on reshaping the nose and defining the contours of the chin. For sedation, a standard intravenous anesthetic was used. After administering the anesthesia, the doctor carefully monitored Paloma's response before starting the surgery. His assistant kept track of the time and handed him instruments as needed, ensuring the procedure continued smoothly. During the first 2 hours, the doctor marked surgical points and began reshaping tissue, using sutures and sterile dressings throughout. Everything proceeded calmly. No alarms, no unusual sounds. By midday, the procedure entered its final phase, applying external stabilizers and sterile coverings. The doctor examined the outcome, made a note in his log, and informed his assistant that the procedure was complete. Once it was over, the equipment was removed, and Paloma was transferred to a nearby recovery couch to rest as the anesthesia wore off. A nurse gently cleaned her face with antiseptic and secured a protective bandage. Paloma remained unconscious, but her breathing was steady. The doctor noted she was resting under the effects of the medication. Not long after, her mother was invited into the room. Paloma was still under sedation. Her face was partially bandaged, and a stabilizing strip was placed across the bridge of her nose. The doctor gave a brief overview of the post-op care routine and explained that she'd need to be monitored for several hours. Her mother agreed to wait. During that time, the doctor continued checking Paloma's vitals, manually recording her pulse and blood pressure. The nurse cleaned up the instruments and prepared fresh dressing materials. By evening, the doctor said the remainder of the recovery could be done at home and handed over written instructions: rest, use of pain relievers, and regular cleaning of the dressings. Her mother signed the form acknowledging the instructions and helped Paloma get ready to leave. The girl had come to by then. She looked drowsy and disoriented. They helped her stand, got her dressed, and walked her out. The visit to the clinic was over. Everything appeared to have gone like a routine cosmetic procedure, with no visible complications. Paloma spent the following day at home. The first few hours passed quietly. She slept most of the time and occasionally mentioned feeling slightly dizzy. Her mother monitored her condition, gave her water and pain relief, assuming her body was simply recovering from the anesthesia. Toward evening, her temperature began to rise, but nothing seemed alarming. The next morning, though, things changed fast. Paloma's condition worsened suddenly. She felt extremely weak. Her breathing became rapid and her skin turned pale. Her face had started to swell. The bandages stayed dry, but the area underneath was clearly tender. Her mother called the doctor, who tried to reassure her, saying it might be a normal reaction, and advised her to continue treatment and keep Paloma resting. By midday, Paloma's temperature had climbed past 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit. She began refusing food and water, complaining of pain in her chest and abdomen. Her speech became slurred, her movements sluggish. As the evening progressed, her breathing grew shallow. Her heart rate sped up. That's when her mother realized they needed to get to a hospital, fast. They arrived at a private emergency room late that night. Paloma was brought in on a gurney. She was conscious, but visibly disoriented. Her temperature was nearly 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and doctors immediately began administering fever-reducing medication. Signs of inflammation were already visible on her face, redness around the bandages, swelling, and increased sensitivity in the surrounding tissue. During the initial exam, doctors suspected a post-op infection. Paloma was kept under observation. Overnight, her condition worsened. The fever persisted, her breathing became more labored, and she developed abdominal and back pain. Blood work revealed signs of a systemic inflammatory response. Doctors made the call to move her to the intensive care unit. By the third day after the surgery, Paloma had developed sepsis. Tests confirmed the rapid spread of infection, likely stemming from post-operative contamination. Her face remained swollen, skin rashes appeared, and her breathing became raspy. The medical team started oxygen therapy, intravenous antibiotics, and medications to maintain her blood pressure. Despite their efforts, her condition continued to deteriorate. By day 4, doctors reported a drop in oxygen saturation and early signs of multiple organ failure. Resuscitation efforts were ongoing, but her vitals showed no improvement. Later that same day, according to the official medical report, Paloma's condition turned critical. She lost consciousness, and her blood pressure plummeted. The medical team performed CPR for over 30 minutes. Eventually, clinical death was declared. Minutes later, biological death was confirmed. Paloma passed away in the first days of September 2024. The official cause listed in the medical records was complications from a surgical procedure, likely of infectious origin. At that point, everything was still classified as a medical case, without legal implications. It wouldn't be until later that the events of that day would become the focal point of an investigation that would shift the entire narrative. After her passing was confirmed, Paloma's body was transferred to the morgue at the city hospital. An autopsy was scheduled for that same day. The medical examiner noted recent surgical intervention and clear signs of systemic infection. The findings confirmed the infectious nature of the complications. However, the final report lacked details about the origin of the pathogen, a missing piece that would later ignite conflict between the family and the hospital staff. After Paloma's death, her mother handled the paperwork and accepted the doctor's conclusion. But when her father arrived later, he strongly disagreed with the official version. He believed her passing was the result of medical mistakes during the operation, not complications, as the hospital had claimed. His argument was clear. Paloma had no known chronic illnesses, and the complications developed unusually fast after the surgery. The first sign of conflict came from discrepancies in the documentation. The death certificate issued by the local registry office listed the cause as acute infection leading to multi-organ failure. However, a separate medical report from the hospital used a different phrase: shock of unknown origin. Paloma's father demanded an independent review and a copy of the autopsy report. His request was denied, with authorities citing the lack of a court order. Further inconsistencies emerged in the clinic's paperwork. The discharge time recorded in the post-op report didn't match eyewitness accounts. Additionally, The medical file claimed the doctor had called Paloma's mother shortly after the procedure, something she denied, insisting she never received any such call. At that point, two conflicting narratives had formed. For the mother, it was still a tragic medical mistake. For the father, it was evidence of an unauthorized and unsafe operation. These differences turned a private family tragedy into the beginnings of a criminal case. 2 days after Paloma Nicole Arellano Escobedo's funeral, her father filed a formal complaint with the Durango prosecutor's office. He claimed his daughter died as a result of an illegal surgical procedure, performed without his knowledge and without the required medical clearance. He requested legal action be taken against the child's mother, her partner, and the doctor who performed the surgery. Alongside his complaint, he submitted medical records, post-op photos, and messages showing he never gave consent for the procedure. Given the nature of the claim, harm resulting from unauthorized medical treatment, the case was immediately handed over to the appropriate department. That same day, prosecutors registered the case and began an audit of the clinic where the procedure took place. The investigation uncovered that the clinic had no license to conduct surgical operations and was operating out of a facility unfit for medical use. These violations formed the legal basis for the first charges. At the same time, Paloma's father reached out to local journalists. His statement triggered a media firestorm. Local outlets published multiple reports naming the doctor, revealing the clinic's address, and outlining the alleged violations. After the coverage went public, the clinic shut down, its website was taken offline, and phone lines stopped working. New complaints began pouring into the prosecutor's office, citizens claiming they had undergone similar procedures at the same clinic. These testimonies expanded the scope of the investigation. When questioned, staff admitted that medical logs were filled out by hand and that some records had been destroyed. Paloma's mother confirmed that she was the one who gave consent for the surgery and paid for it in cash. According to her, the doctor assured her the procedure was safe and said nothing about needing consent from the other parent. Her partner was present that day, helping coordinate transportation and logistics. Prosecutors interpreted these actions as a joint effort that violated the child's rights. After reviewing all the details, investigators concluded that unauthorized medical treatment had been performed and that gross negligence contributed to the patient's death. Charges were filed against the mother, her partner, and the doctor, who had gone missing immediately after the incident. The announcement of the first official charges caught the attention of national media. Public debates erupted around the lack of oversight for private clinics and the responsibilities parents carry when making healthcare decisions for their children. Prosecutors formally announced that a criminal case was underway, with a focus on determining each party's level of culpability in what had become a deeply troubling tragedy. What began as a private family nightmare had now evolved into a full-fledged criminal case, with the girl's parents and the unlicensed surgeon at the center of it. By mid-September 2024, the Durango prosecutor's office officially opened a criminal case into the death of Paloma Nicole Arellano Escobedo. On September 15th, her mother and her mother's partner were taken into custody without resistance. The doctor who performed the surgery had fled and was declared a fugitive. At the first court hearing, prosecutors presented medical documents signed by the mother, along with witness statements from clinic staff. The prosecution argued that the surgery was conducted without the father's consent and without a valid surgical license. The court found the evidence compelling and ordered that both suspects remain in custody during the investigation. The defendants were charged with negligence, providing unauthorized medical services, and violating the rights of a minor. The defense claimed the mother was unaware the procedure was unlawful and that she had trusted the doctor's assurances. The court rejected all motions to modify the arrest conditions, citing a risk of witness interference. In the fall, The court ordered additional expert reviews, including documentation analysis and verification of the substances used during the procedure. The detention period was extended, and the court denied all requests to convert custody into house arrest. By spring 2025, investigators concluded their evidence gathering and transferred the case to trial. As of October 2025, Paloma Nicole Arellano Escobedo's mother and her partner remain in custody. The trial is being conducted behind closed doors. Prosecutors believe the evidence is strong. The defense, however, maintains that the accused had no direct responsibility for the child's death. No verdict has been reached yet. Once the case was handed over to the court, investigators encountered several legal and procedural hurdles. The biggest challenge was identifying the exact cause of Paloma's death. Initial expert findings pointed to an infection-related complication following surgery, but they couldn't determine the origin of the infection. Prosecutors called for a second forensic review, this time bringing in specialists from a federal medical institute. The new examination confirmed that the infection had spread throughout her body, but couldn't conclusively say whether it was due to unsterilized instruments or improper post-operative care. The report cited multiple contributing factors: a weakened immune response, high toxic load, and the use of medications of unknown origin. These findings complicated the legal classification of the crime and prompted a review of the original charges. The defense argued that prosecutors failed to prove a direct cause and effect link between the accused's actions and the girl's death. The prosecution countered that it was their decision to proceed with surgery at a questionable clinic that set everything in motion. The court requested further documentation from the state medical board, but some of those requests went unanswered due to bureaucratic delays. The absence of licenses and the unclear professional status of the surgeon made things worse. No official copies of his certifications could be found, and clinic records had been destroyed when the facility shut down. Investigators were forced to request federal verification, adding months to the timeline. By September 2025, forensic experts concluded that Paloma's death might have been prevented had she received proper hospital care in time. That finding was crucial. It placed responsibility not only on those who arranged the procedure, but also on the medical staff who failed to ensure proper aftercare. Based on these developments, the prosecution petitioned to revise the charges, adding counts of negligence by the physician and the clinic's management. The court partially granted the request. The main suspects remained in custody, but the legal framing of the case now allowed for future revisions should new evidence come to light. The investigation moved from a straightforward case into a more complex phase, involving medical assessments and administrative oversight reviews. As of October 2025, the case remains in court in Durango. Paloma's mother and her partner are still in detention, and the final verdict is pending. Investigators have finished their part, but the court is awaiting results from additional expert reviews to determine the precise origin of the infection that led to her death. The surgeon who performed the operation is still missing, making it impossible to question him and fully establish the extent of responsibility among the accused. Medical experts remain divided. Some believe the infection started during surgery, while others point to potential issues during recovery. Prosecutors continue to push for convictions, but acknowledge that some legal language in the charges may need refining. Paloma's father is calling for the investigation to widen and include oversight agencies that, in his view, allowed the clinic to operate without proper licensing. A final ruling is expected once all outstanding forensic reports are submitted, likely sometime in the first quarter of 2026.